I had a plan for this video, and like many good plans, foiled by the weather. It's true. Today, we're going to Jekyll Island. What's up, YouTube? I am Lauren Holly, also Graphic Nation with a K all over the interwebs. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I have been looking forward to Jekyll Island for quite some time, and for whatever reason, I had not made it there yet. I know it's really close to Atlanta. There's no reason for me to have not visited there yet. I guess I got so bogged down in the details of trying to plan the perfect trip and, shoot like some epic event like, a full moon or a Milky Way or something really just crazy epic. Well, that didn't exactly happen. And while I knew the Milky Way wasn't going to work out for this trip, but I sure had like high expectations. Like my expectations were up here, but the actual circumstances were way down here. Anyway, so we get to Jekyll Island and the weather. So overcast, just not the magical scene of my landscape photography dreams. So we were there for sunset on Saturday night, and man, the sky was horrible. It was awful. I mean, there were no pictures to make at this point. It was just so gray. Didn't look like there was any chance of an improvement. And to top that off, there were 3 weddings on the beach, and there were people just everywhere. We just couldn't get away from the crowds. Every direction we tried to go in, there were just people climbing all over the Driftwood. It was just that, no long exposure could erase that many people. So we kind of got a little bit bummed, and we decided we wanted to head to the local market because they closed at 8 o'clock and the sky wasn't doing anything. There's way too many people out here. There's no shot to make. So we hopped in the car, went to the market, and of course, when you know it, we pull up in the parking lot, get out of the car, and the sky just blew up with gorgeous pink and blue and purple, the most incredible cotton candy sky that you could imagine. So I just grabbed my lens ball and I took the best photo that I could take. Sometimes it is what it is. You're in a parking lot and not at the beach. Big mistake. Yeah, what are you gonna do? I can't see the future. Never leave the beach at sunset. So I didn't take as many long exposures as I should have, didn't take hardly any video at all, and I walked away feeling pretty defeated, but don't count me out yet. When I finally got the images back in to Lightroom and started to take a look, wouldn't you know, there was actually more color in the sky than I had remembered. I actually ended up getting some pretty decent images. So, I just love raw format because it sees things that you don't even know are there. I love raw. Anyway, I should just stop rambling and show you the photos.
finished images. And they look pretty great. But what about that gray, gloomy, overcast sky that I talked about that hung around all weekend? Well, it actually appeared that way for me most of the time, but I realized when I got my images back to my office and started to open them up in Lightroom that the very first morning that I got up to shoot sunrise, I actually realized that there was more color in the sky on that particular morning than I'd remembered. And I was able to sort of really focus in on that very short period of time when the sky was at its most colorful. Now, it didn't appear as dramatic in person because the human eye kind of, doesn't really accurately really see all the color that is truly there. But your camera, on the other hand, if you're shooting in RAW mode, it sees quite a lot more that is actually visible with the human eye. So I'm going to pick this image right here. This is one of the more brightly colored images. Let's go ahead and dig into this, and I'm going to show you what this image looked like from RAW and how I achieved this nice, brilliant sunrise. All right, real quickly, let's just go over the camera settings. So I shot this on a micro four thirds camera. I used the Panasonic Lumix G85, and I shot at ISO 100. Exposure was 3.2 seconds at f/22. And the focal length here is 27 millimeters. Now, on a micro four thirds camera, the crop factor is ×2, so that would actually be equivalent of about 54 millimeters on full frame. And I used the Lumix 12 to 35 f2.8 lens, which is equivalent to your average sort of 24 to 70 on a full frame. So those are my shooting specs for this image. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make a virtual copy of this image and take it back to baseline and reset that. All right, so the first thing that I always change in my images when I edit, I shoot in Adobe RGB, and I always go up here in Lightroom and change the color profile to Adobe Landscape. And that instantly gives you some brighter colors. You always want to do that, especially if you're shooting landscape. There's a couple of other ones you'll notice here. You would want to use portrait for people, obviously, and vivid can sometimes give you some nice colors, but typically landscape is going to give you the brightest color. All right. So the other thing I always do right away is pull down my highlights and pull up the shadows. And I think that's a little too much on the shadows. I kind of want to keep that silhouette-y type look, so I'm going to keep it probably right about here. Now let me hold the Option key, find my white point. My white point is right about here. Let's see what that looks like. That looks pretty good. And I always pull up the clarity just a little bit, and I usually boost vibrance, and I'll boost saturation, but not too much. So the first thing, after I've kind of done these initial steps, you'll notice that there's just a very blue cast, and that's in the white balance. So I can control that and bring in some more yellow tones and bring in some pinker tones. And this is actually going to help a lot, right? Now, I don't want to go too far with the pink, and I might even back off a little bit on the yellow. All right, let's see. Sort of get into this. That looks pretty good. I'm going to come back to it later. I'm going to skip all this stuff for now. I am going to make my red just a little more red and a little more saturated. And I'm going to bring orange a little more red as well, a little more saturated, and yellow. Let's see. Pull yellow in just a little. The number one color that's really bothering me here is the blues. Okay, so a little purple. So, I want to pull my blue and correct that because it has a little bit of a purple cast to it. Now, this is all about like having to choose the best white balance overall and then making subtle adjustments to the colors that don't quite look like they are displaying correctly. And with a sunrise kind of like this, I find that blues lean a little purple. So I want to pull back some of the blue without jumping the shark and going over into this green space, which looks too weird. So I'll pull blue up just a little bit, and then I'm also gonna brighten blue up just a little bit. And here with the purple tones, I also can affect how the overall image is kind of looking. So I can make the purple tones a little more pink, or I can make them a little more blue. In this case, I think a little more pink, a little bit of saturation, and a little bit of luminance. This looks the most natural to me, based on having witnessed a lot of sunrises and sunsets. Okay, so I'm going to scoot down here and just check a couple of boxes. I'm going to pull up my sharpening a little bit and pull up my noise reduction and remove chromatic aberration. Most people also will enable profile corrections. However, Lumix lenses don't need to be corrected because the lens correction is built into the lens, so I don't necessarily need to do this. But you probably would choose this, you know, for whatever camera you're using. Let's see, everything looks good here. All right, so now I want to take a little bit, pull back on my exposure and hit the contrast just a little bit. And the one thing that I want to do is really focus in on the center part of the image and just kind of give it a highlight. So I usually will use this radial filter here, this gradient radial filter. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to draw a circle and put it kind of right over the sunrise here. And it sort of comes in inverted. You know, if I were to edit this right now, you'd see it would be editing the outside part of the circle, which I don't want to do. I want to scoot down here and invert this so that now I can focus on the middle. All right, so in the middle part of the circle, I am going to boost the saturation just a little bit. I'm going to put a little bit of orange and maybe just a little bit of pink and brighten it just a little tiny bit. And the other thing that I like to do is make sure that my feather is really big. Like if I pull the feather all the way down to 0, you'll see this like hard line, which looks totally crazy and nobody wants that. But if you take your feather, let me grab that. If you take your feather and pull it all the way up to 100, you really can't tell. It's not like totally glaringly obvious that I popped this little radial fill on here. And I only do this to brighten things up just a little bit. And you can pop clarity just a little, pull texture back just a little. And this looks pretty good, right? So that's how I achieved going from this sort of basic gray, boring, overcast looking sky, and then truly digging into that raw file and going in and getting the color that is already there, the color that you can't see with your eyes. I think people oftentimes underestimate how much control you actually have in the raw file, even if a scene is less than impressive. Not going to walk through every single image, obviously, but that's sort of my workflow for how I approach editing my sunrise and sunset images. And as you can see, it's a pretty dramatic difference.
That was my first ever trip to Driftwood Beach. Not exactly as planned, but not too bad either, so I'll definitely have to make it there again. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. If you're still here, give me a thumbs up if you like the video, or even better yet, give me a follow. That'll do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.